This podcast is produced by the Fireside Chat Club of Canada. Hello, and welcome to Canada as I See It. Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast. Now, I've spoken about hockey on the podcast before, but today I'm going to look at the spoils of what the men's professional teams play for in North America. It was on this date, that's February the 23rd in 1893, that former Governor General Sir Frederick Arthur Lord Stanley donated the Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup, later known as the Stanley Cup, to the Canadian Amateur Hockey Association champions, the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association. Now, you'll hear one particular word in there mentioned a couple of times. Yes, the Stanley Cup was originally intended as an award for the top amateur hockey club in Canada. However, as hockey grew in popularity and more teams began hiring professional players, the rules about how and when the cup was awarded was changed in 1910, and the Stanley Cup became the oldest trophy competed for by professional athletes in North America. Interesting note, Lord Stanley had stipulated that winning teams could add a silver ring to the bottom of the bowl. That's really the Stanley Cup. I mean, if you've seen pictures of it, I'll link a photo of it on Podbean and my website. The cup is actually just that. It's just a large cup. But over the years, these silver rings, as Lord Stanley had noted, have been added and added and added. It's like he knew what was going to happen. The thing, though, is every few years, when a new ring is added, the previous or the oldest ring, I guess, is removed. Because at one point, the cup doesn't look like the tower, I guess, that it is now. It actually began to look like a tall stovepipe hat. Now, in the early years, when amateur teams competed for the cup, it was dominated by teams, well, mostly from Montreal. There was the MAAA, the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association, the Montreal Victorias, the Montreal Shamrocks, the Montreal Wanderers. But, okay, just to let other teams in on it, we also had the Winnipeg Victorias, the Ottawa Silver Seven, the Kenora Thistles, the Ottawa Senators, the Quebec Bulldogs, the Toronto Blue Shirts, and the Vancouver Millionaires. I guess that had something to do with the gold rush up and down the West Coast back in the days. That had to have had something to do with it. As I say, the interesting thing, though, about that list, well, besides the fact that half of them were teams from Montreal, was that they were all Canadian teams. In fact, the first American team to win the Cup was the Seattle Metropolitans in 1916 and 1917. Now, it used to be that teams could just randomly challenge each other for the Cup. I guess they figured, hey, we can beat you guys, we challenge you. And, one player would slap the other one with his glove, and it became like a duel sort of thing. But yeah, that went on for a while, but then the trustees finally ruled that, you could really only challenge it if it's at the end of a season. Nothing, it used to be any time. But that process actually evolved a little further for the next few years when it was decided that there would be a set tournament to decide who would be awarded the cup. You'll note that in that one list that I gave you a little while ago, there was the Montreal Victorias and the Winnipeg Victorias. It kind of reminds me of that, when I was talking about the CFL and we had the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Ottawa Roughriders. Really, guys, come on, a little variety would be nice. But actually, just thinking, maybe they did have an idea, because the Victorias were referred to mostly as a nod to Queen Victoria. But these days, the professional women's hockey league team that plays in, go ahead, guess. Yeah, it's Montreal. These days, they're known as the Victoire. I wouldn't be surprised if that was like a nod to their predecessors. So right now we're in 1917. Well, not now, but back then, in the story that I'm telling. And there were three leagues actually that competed for the Stanley Cup. There was the Pacific Coast Hockey Association, the Western Canada Hockey League, and the newly christened National Hockey League. And each of those leagues would supply a team that would compete to see who would get the prize. Now, the NHL had just been thought of, started, but it really wasn't until 1926, about 9 years later, that the NHL became the exclusive property of the Stanley Cup. And then from then on, the NHL would have a season as they do now, and then at the end of the season, the best teams would compete for the cup. It just sort of, neatened it up a little. Now, this cup, you would think, with it being, actually solid silver and quite dear, that people would want to take care of it. But really, it's gone through a few controversial situations. Back in 1905, members of the Ottawa Silver Seven, they decided to drop kick the trophy into the Rideau Canal. Maybe they were competing to become maybe the next Ottawa Rough Rider. Call back to that. Yeah. A couple years later, the Montreal Wanderers left the cup with a photographer. And the photographer's mother thought, isn't that a nice little thing? It'll make a great flower pot. Yeah, really. A couple more years passed by, and the Montreal Canadiens, they left the Stanley Cup in a snowbank after stopping to change a flat tire on the way to a party. 1979, the cup was, quotes, borrowed by Guy Lafleur after the Montreal Canadiens victory. It's another Montreal team. He put the trophy in the trunk of his car, and he took it to Thurso, Quebec, where his parents lived. And then family and neighbors came by, and they all got a really good look at it. And thinking about that, I think that he may have inadvertently started a trend where each player of the winning team now takes the cup to his hometown to show it off to friends and family. Now, over the last century plus, the Stanley Cup tournament has only been canceled twice since its inception. The first was in 1919 due to the Spanish flu outbreak, and the second time was in 2005 due to a labor dispute. Now, who has won the Stanley Cup the most number of times? You might be surprised here. Yes and no. The Montreal Canadiens have won the most cups. They've won 24. They're followed by, now this is the surprising one for perhaps a lot of you out there, they were followed by the Toronto Maple Leafs with 13 wins of the Cup. Now that includes one as the Toronto Arenas and one as the Toronto St. Patrick's. But they were the same franchise. They just changed their name over the years. Coming in third, we have the Detroit Red Wings with 11. Now, the numbers drop off a little bit there, but those three teams were actually part of what was called the Original Six. Now, the Original Six were teams that survived the Great Depression and World War II. They're seen to be the teams that really set the groundwork of the present National Hockey League. Just for note, the other three teams were the Boston Bruins, and they've won 6 cups, the Chicago Blackhawks, also 6, and the New York Rangers, who've won 4, although they've won more recently than the Toronto Maple Leafs. Toronto Maple Leafs last pick theirs up in 1967. So as I say, this is the anniversary of when the first Stanley Cup was awarded 132 years ago on this date. This year, the Cup will not be awarded until about the last week of June. And that is, for the most part, because there are now 32 teams in the league. And really, it takes some time to pare that number down. This last week was, in fact, the halfway point in the season. Now, it's usually been what teams of all-stars, the favorite and most talented players in the league, this is when they put on an exhibition for the fans. And it has been known to be, quite light-hearted and, playful. But this year, the league decided to have a tournament called the Four Nations Tournament. And we had teams from Sweden, Finland, the United States, and Canada, filled with players taken from NHL teams based on where they were born, what country. And really, they gave us what was really a more competitive tournament by far than some Stanley Cup finals. They played this over an 8-day period, and Team Canada came out victorious last Thursday with a 3-2 victory over the U.S. in overtime, nonetheless. Nothing like making it exciting, eh? So, really, now, much like Groundhog Day and the 6-week prediction of more winter, I predict that after playing 4 months of NHL hockey, there are going to be 4 more months until the end of the season. Mark my words. I'll call back to this episode in the future and just let you know who won it. If you would like to introduce the podcast, please send me a recording of you saying, "This podcast is produced by the Fireside Chat Club of Canada." And you can email that to me at asiseeit@warpole.ca. And as I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to see, each week now I've started a new thing where if I mention something in the podcast, I'll post it on Podbean, where for those of you who get your podcast from there. But if you don't and you listen to it maybe on another service, I'm also posting the links to certain things on my own website, and that's warpole.ca. Here comes the spelling, WHORPOLE.ca. And I'm going to put those links over on the left side of the page, so as soon as you get there, you'll see them. Well, that's if you're on a desktop. If you're on a phone, I've been working on trying to make it look a little better, but yeah, the phone is a little bit of a funny thing to deal with when you're working on web pages. But scroll down and you'll likely see, well, they'll be clearly marked. I'll say links from this week's episode of Canada as I See It. I want to thank everybody so much for listening this week for show number 70. Show number 70. Wow. I will talk to you again next week. And that's a part of Canada as I see it. It is written and produced by me, James Warple, and brought to life by the Fireside Chat Club of Canada. Our theme song is Night Owls by Braden Deal. If you have any questions or comments, please email me at asiseeit@warple.ca. Join us every Sunday for another episode of Canada as I See It.